Hi there everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm the GCSE science teacher. In today's video, we're going to be studying about the brain, and this is for GCSE biology students. So if you do enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up so it tells me you are enjoying it and this sort of content, and I'll continue to make more. Also, if you know of anyone who is struggling with GCSE science or you feel as though this may benefit somebody, definitely feel free to share this video with them so they can also enjoy content on YouTube that will help them get a better grade. Also, if you haven't already, do subscribe. It'll be lovely to have you as part of our community, and thank you so much if you already have. I really do appreciate it. So let's get started. Let's talk about the structure of the brain. And at GCSE, there's a couple of key points about the brain that you need to really know. And other courses like psychology, for example, will probably explore more of this. And also A-level biology, there's kind of a lot to the brain, but at GCSE there's a few key ideas that you should be aware of. So the first one is this outer layer, this large area that we mostly see when we look at the picture of the brain, and this is called the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex. And essentially it's split up in two hemispheres and it's connected by something called the corpus callosum. And essentially this area of the brain is important for memory, it's important for language, conscious thought, personality, and also intelligence. And those kind of sutras, those sort of squiggly parts of the brain, essentially increase the surface area that the brain has. And this helps with those different functions. The two hemispheres, by the way, some people believe one side of the brain is responsible for something and the other side of the brain is the other part. There are lots of different connections that go on, but the corpus callosum connects the two hemispheres together. And that connection is really vital. In fact, the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body and vice versa. So parts of the brain do communicate to each other and other parts of the body as well. But those are the key points you need to know. The hypothalamus is a really important part of the brain as well. It's towards the bottom part of the brain. And essentially, its main job is to regulate water, balance, and also temperature. It's where the thermoregulatory center is. And I will be making a whole video on temperature control and how we maintain a core temperature of 37 degrees or roughly that temperature in the body. And this will be a whole video on its own because there's a lot to it. We'll also talk about negative feedback and how this all interconnects together. But that is where temperature is regulated along with water levels. We also have another part of the brain that's towards the bottom, and this is called the medulla oblongata. And this part of the brain is really essential for the non-conscious parts of our system. So things like breathing rate, heart rate, is kind of monitored by the medulla oblongata. And without it, we wouldn't be able to do a lot of unconscious processes. So it's a really important part of the brain. And then lastly, we have the cerebellum, which looks a little bit like a cabbage. It's at the very bottom of the brain. And this essentially helps us with balance and coordination along with muscular activity. So as you can see, there's a lot of key parts of the brain. And a lot of it is involved with that coordination and movement and connecting different parts of the body to one another. But also we can see that our prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain at the front of our brain, this is highly developed so that we can actually acquire different skills more so than other animals. And if you are interested in brain science or if you're interested in anything to do with the brain, I will leave some information in the description box as always as extra reading, not necessarily related to GCSE content, but if you are interested and you'd like to learn more, I'll leave that in there for you so you can have a browse and let me know if you're interested. So how have we as scientists developed our understanding of the brain, and how do we know that each region of the brain is responsible for those functions? Well, this information has been developed over thousands of years, each civilization thinking about the brain in a different way. For example, the ancient Egyptians, they didn't actually think very much of the brain. In fact, they didn't preserve the brain along with the other organs during the mummification process. However, the ancient Greeks did believe that the brain was very important for conscious thought and spirituality. So it's a lot of different beliefs until we started to kind of exercise modern medicine, where we started to really see the impact of the brain and, more importantly, the different regions of the brain and how brain damage in those regions could actually lead to changes in the overall psyche or the overall behavior of an individual. A really key example they want you to know at GCSE is someone called Phineas Gage, who essentially had an accident in 1848, but he survived. He was actually essentially working on a railway track, and a pipe, like a solid metal pipe, went through his skull, and he luckily survived. But they noticed that after the surgery and kind of making him get better, sort of thing, after being in hospital, he changed slightly. His personality changed, and this is because of the front part of his brain. His cerebral cortex was damaged to the point where he actually started to be a bit more impulsive and acted slightly differently to how he used to before the accident. And essentially, this case helped scientists to determine that different parts of the brain were really responsible for certain things like personality. There are lots of other methods that scientists over the years have used. Of course, surgery, which is incredibly invasive, and often looking at the brain and actually using brain tissue will require someone who's actually already passed, so we can actually look at that tissue in more depth. But of course, as well, surgery can be conducted on someone who is still living, and this is something where often if there does need to be any surgery, such as maybe removing a tumor, or some parts of the brain have been damaged, often scientists will actually get the patient to play an instrument or to talk during the surgery to ensure that they are still functioning correctly. And that's something that can be done to kind of mitigate any damage that doesn't necessarily need to be there accidentally. So I'll leave some information if you are interested in the description box, because it's quite a fascinating world, is the surgery associated with the brain. But also there was this idea in the 19th century. I know I mentioned about the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Greeks, but also in the 19th century there was this study called phrenology, which is where scientists would look at how the scalp and the head of an individual, if it had small protrusions, maybe that was linked to a certain kind of personality trait and things like that. So there has always been this understanding that the brain and parts of the brain were associated with different things, but it was just recent medical knowledge that we have now, this modern medicine, has actually helped us understand it the way we do. So here are some non-invasive medical techniques that can be used today to actually identify the different regions of the brain and to check the health of the brain as well. So the first one is called an EEG, or an electroencephalogram. This is a really hard word to say, so feel free to say it out loud. I've written it phonetically so you can say it too. But essentially, this is a device that you would place on somebody's head, and it essentially observes and monitors the electrical activity of the brain. So if we were to stimulate a motor area of the brain, an involuntary movement would occur, and it kind of helps us map the different regions of the brain as well, and see if there's any problems there too. We also have MRI scans, so magnetic resonance imaging. I did talk about MRI scans in a previous video, the physics as well behind some medical imaging, so I'll leave that for you in the description box, or I'll link it at the end or in a card for you. But essentially, this uses strong magnetic fields and radio waves, and it helps us to image a 360 3D image of the structure of the brain. And it also helps us to see the function of the brain. So essentially what we could do is ask somebody to perform certain tasks, and whilst those tasks were undertaken by the patient or the individual, we can actually see which parts of the brain were activated. So it's a really great technique to actually identify different parts of the brain in a really non-invasive way. Remember, surgery, for example, is very invasive. It can increase the risk of infection, but also surgery on the brain can damage the brain unnecessarily. So these are some other ways that we can actually image the brain and learn about it further. And that's it from me today. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I've been the GCSE science teacher and you have been curious. If you did, please do give it a big thumbs up. Share this with someone else so they don't miss out on key revision for paper 2. And also subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for your support, and I will catch you in the next one. Take care.